To ask what life was like for the average caveman is to open a doorway into a past so vast and fundamentally different from our own, that it challenges the very limits of our imagination. We are separated from this world, not by mere centuries, but by millennia. Deep echoing chasm of time in which entire species have risen and fallen, continents have subtly shifted, and the very climate of the earth has waxed and waned between ice and warmth. The term caveman itself is a simplistic label, a convenient but often misleading shorthand for the diverse populations of early humans who walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not a single, monolithic group huddling in dark caves. They were explorers, innovators, artists, and survivors who adapted to a world ruled by raw nature. This narrative seeks to reconstruct that lost world, not through the lens of dramatic Hollywood tales or simplistic cartoons, but by piecing together the evidence left behind in the silent archives of the past. The faint traces of hearths in ancient soil, the stone tools shaped by skilled hands, the magnificent paintings that adorn deep cavern walls, and the very bones that have endured the weight of ages. Our journey will focus on the experience of the average individual, the unsung member of a small, tight-knit band, struggling for survival in a landscape filled with both immense beauty and profound danger. We will explore the rhythms of their daily lives, how they found food, built shelter, crafted tools, formed social bonds, and understood the world around them. But to truly understand their existence, we must first step away from the constant hum of our modern world, from the glare of electric lights and the certainty of our next meal. We must imagine a life governed by the sun and the seasons, a life where the line between life and death was thin, and where the community was the essential unit of survival. This is a story of resilience, of the slow, patient accumulation of knowledge that would eventually lead to the world we know today. It is a story written in stone and bone, waiting to be read. So let us begin this journey at the end of a long day, as the sun dips below the horizon and the ancient world is plunged into a darkness so complete it is almost tangibly darkness that defines the first and most fundamental experience we will explore, the mystery of sleep in a prehistoric night. The world did not simply grow dark, it was consumed by it. As the sun relinquished its hold on the sky, the light did not fade gently into a comfortable twilight, illuminated by the familiar glow of streetlights and distant cities. Instead, it was a swift and absolute surrender. The deep blues and fiery oranges of sunset bled away into a profound blackness, broken only by the cold, sharp light of the stars and, on some nights, the brilliant ghostly presence of the moon. For the small band of humans huddled near a limestone outcrop, this transition was the most critical juncture of the day. The day's activities, the foraging for roots and berries, the tracking of game, the meticulous chipping of flint, were all a prelude to the single most important task, surviving the night. Their home was not a deep, cavernous chamber of the imagination, but a shallow rock shelter. It faced south, catching the sun's warmth for most of the day, and was protected by a massive overhang that kept out the rain and the worst of the wind. The floor was dry, swept clean of debris and lined with piles of dry grasses and furs. The air inside carried a complex symphony of smells. The earthy scent of dried herbs, the smoky residue of the fire, the distinct odor of human bodies, and the faint musky aroma of the animal skins that served as both bedding and clothing. At the entrance of this shelter, a fire crackled, its flames dancing like living spirits, guarding the threshold between the safety of the group and the unknown dangers of the night. This fire was not merely for warmth. It was a beacon, a weapon, and a tool for social bonding. Its light pushed back against the oppressive blackness, creating a small island of visibility and comfort in a sea of potential threats. The average member of this band, let us call him Tor, felt the weight of the darkness in his bones. His body, attuned to the natural rhythms of the planet, was already signaling its need for rest. The physical exertions of the day had been immense. Hours spent walking across rugged terrain, carrying tools and whatever food had been gathered, had left his muscles aching with a deep, familiar fatigue. As the temperature dropped, the pull of the fire's warmth became irresistible. He sat with his kin, their bodies forming a loose circle round the flames. There was little conversation in the way we understand it. Communication was a tapestry of grunts, gestures, a few key words, and expressive facial cues. The day's events were recounted not through elaborate stories, but through shared silence, punctuated by a pointed gesture or a low murmur that conveyed understanding. A shared glance could communicate satisfaction at a successful hunt or concern over a dwindling water source. The social hierarchy around the fire was unspoken but understood. The eldest members of the group, their faces lined with the maps of countless seasons, held positions closest to the heat. Their knowledge was the tribe's most valuable asset. They remembered the paths to water during a long drought. They could identify a seemingly insignificant track that betrayed the presence of a large herd, and they knew which plants could heal a wound and which could bring a swift and painful death. The younger adults, like Tor, formed the next ring, their strength serving as the tribe's protectors and primary providers. The children drowsed in the laps of their mothers, their small bodies tucked safely within the heart of the group. As the night deepened, the sounds of the wilderness beyond the fire's glow grew louder and more distinct. The nocturnal world was awakening. The hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf pack, the rustle of some small creature in the undergrowth. Each sound was analyzed instinctively. Tur's ears, far sharper than those of modern humans, accustomed to a constant background noise, filtered these sounds. Some were meaningless, the white noise of the natural world. Others triggered a primal alertness. The sudden snap of a twig too close to the shelter would cause every head to turn, every hand to tighten around a spear or a heavy stone. Fear was a constant companion, but it was a managed fear, an essential survival tool that kept them vigilant. Sleep, when it finally came, was not a single, uninterrupted block of time, as it is for many today. It was a fluid state, segmented and light. The concept of a private, isolated sleep was unknown. The group slept together, a tangled mass of warmth and security. Body heat was a crucial resource, and the shared space provided safety in numbers. Tor would drift into sleep, but his rest was shallow. Any unusual sound or change in the rhythm of the night insects, a warning grunt from one of the others on watch would bring him instantly back to wakefulness. He might wake 2 or 3 times during the night, adjust his position, check on the fire, and then slip back into sleep. This pattern, known as segmented sleep, was the natural rhythm of a life lived in tune with the environment. Dreams in such a world were likely vivid and intense, with the subconscious mind freed from the constant sensory input of the daytime struggle. It would have processed the day's dangers and opportunities. Tor might dream of the great stag that had eluded him, its antlers scraping against the sky, or of the comforting face of his deceased mother. These dreams were not mere fantasies. They were woven into the tribe's understanding of reality, blurring the lines between the physical world and the spirit world. A powerful dream could be a sign, an omen to be discussed with the shaman at first light. The fire required constant tending. Someone, usually rotating among the adults, would remain semi-awake, tasked with adding dried dung or wood to the flames to prevent them from dying out. The loss of the fire was a catastrophe to be avoided at all costs. It meant not only cold, but also vulnerability. Predators like cave lions, hyenas, or wolves were keenly aware of the power of fire and would generally keep their distance from a strong blaze. A dying fire, however, was an invitation. The faint glow of embers could attract curious and hungry eyes from the darkness. Therefore, the preservation of the flame was a sacred duty, a collective responsibility that underscored their precarious existence. The night was not a time of restful peace, but a long, cautious vigil, a waiting game played against the rising of the sun. The first sign of change was not light, but sound. The incessant chorus of crickets and night insects began to diminish, replaced by the tentative, single-note chirp of a waking bird. Then another joined, and another, until the air was filled with a growing symphony that greeted the pale grey light seeping into the eastern horizon. For Tor, waking was a slow, gradual process. There was no alarm clock, no jarring transition. His body responded to the increasing light and the rising chorus of birdsong. He opened his eyes to a world still shrouded in mist and shadow. The fire had burned down to a bed of warm, glowing embers, and a chill hung in the air. His first movements were cautious, stiff from a night spent on the hard ground. He stretched, his muscles protesting, and looked around at his still sleeping family. The watchman from the last shift, an older woman named Una, gave him a slow, tired nod, her duty fulfilled. The dawn was a time of quiet activity. There was no need for spoken commands. Everyone knew their role. The younger children were roused to gather more kindling and dry wood for the fire. With skilled hands, Tor blew on the embers, adding fine dry grasses until a tiny flame licked up. growing steadily as he added larger sticks. Soon, the fire was crackling again, its warmth a welcome defense against the morning chill. The simple act of rekindling the fire was a daily victory, a reaffirmation of their control over their environment. As the light strengthened, revealing the details of the landscape, the dew-covered grasses, the dark mouth of the forest in the distance, the band began to prepare for the day ahead. The first order of business was thirst. Their water source was a swift-flowing stream a short walk from the shelter. Taking empty animal skin bladders and a few sharp-edged stone tools for protection, Tor and another man made the journey. This was a moment of vulnerability. Leaving the safety of the camp required constant vigilance. They moved quietly, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Fresh track in the mud, a disturbed bush. The water was cold and clear, and they drank deeply before filling the skins. On the return journey, they foraged automatically, their eyes spotting edible mushrooms at the base of a tree and a patch of tart, early berries. Back at the shelter, the morning meal was a frugal affair. It consisted of leftovers from the previous evening, some tough, dried meat from a hare caught days before, a handful of nuts, and a few roots that had been roasted in the embers. Food was never taken for granted. Every morsel was appreciated, and nothing was wasted. As they ate, the group's leader, a man named Gron, whose authority was earned through strength and wisdom rather than commanded, began to outline the day's plan. He used a combination of words, gestures, and drawings scratched in the dirt. He pointed towards the river valley, then made the sign for the giant deer. To Mega Sidos, whose herd they had been tracking, he assigned roles. The strongest hunters, including Tor, would go after the game. The older children and one of the women would scout for bird eggs and edible plants along the safer edges of the forest. The eldest woman and a younger mother with a nursing infant would remain at the shelter, tending the fire, preparing hides, and watching over the very young. This division of labor was essential for survival. It maximized the chances of securing food while minimizing risk. The hunter's success was never guaranteed, so the gathering party provided a crucial backup. If the hunt failed, the foraged plants, eggs, and small creatures would prevent starvation. There was no room for specialization in the modern sense. Everyone had to be proficient in multiple skills. Tor was primarily a hunter, but he also knew how to find water, identify certain plants, and perform basic tool-making. Survival depended on this shared, versatile knowledge. Before setting out, the hunters prepared their tools. This was a ritual of profound importance. Their lives depended on the quality and reliability of their equipment. Tor knelt and unpacked his leather toolkit. His most prized possession was a spear, its wooden shaft sturdy and straight, its tip a long, razor-sharp blade of flint that had been carefully flaked and pressure-fitted into a notch at the end. He examined the edge, running his thumb lightly along it. Satisfied, he then checked a smaller, handheld stone tool, a hand axe, which was a multi-purpose instrument for butchering, cutting wood, and scraping hides. Each tool was an extension of his own body, crafted with painstaking effort and intimately known. The act of making these tools was not a separate chore. It was an integral part of life, often done during idle moments in the evening or on rainy days. The sound of stone knapping, the precise tap, tap, tap of a hammerstone striking a flint core to release a perfect flake was the sound of technology and survival. Finally, they were ready. Gron led the way, moving with a fluid ground-eating gait that was both silent and efficient. Tor and the others fell in behind him, their senses heightened to a razor's edge. They had entered the hunting ground, a world of subtle signs and silent communication. The day's struggle and the promise of life for another week had begun. The forest was a cathedral of ancient trees, their canopies filtering the morning sun into shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and pine resin. For the hunting party, this was not a place of beauty to be admired, but a landscape of information to be read. Every step was placed with deliberate care to avoid snapping a twig or rustling a patch of dry leaves. Their communication was reduced to a minimum. A raised hand to halt, a pointed finger to indicate a direction, a series of slow, deliberate hand signals that conveyed complex messages about the terrain and potential prey. Gron, at the front, was a master reader of this natural language. He would stop suddenly, crouching down to examine the soft earth beside a stream. There, preserved in the mud, was a perfect hoofprint. He traced its outline with his finger, judging its depth and sharpness. It was fresh, made within the last few hours. A series of smaller prints surrounded it. A herd was moving this way. He looked up, his eyes scanning the undergrowth, noting the direction in which the broken stems of a fern were bent. The message was passed silently through the group. The trail was hot. Tor felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, a mix of adrenaline-fueled excitement and focused calm. His entire being was concentrated on the pursuit. His hearing seemed to sharpen, filtering out the common sounds of the forest to focus on the anomalous ones. The distant crack of a branch, the soft crunch of a hoof on forest litter. His eyes scanned not for the animal itself, which would be expertly camouflaged, but for the pieces of it that would betray its presence. The flicker of a brown flank between trees, the horizontal line of a back that contradicted the vertical lines of the trunks, the movement of a distant bird startled from its perch. They followed the trail for hours, their progress slow and methodical. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the day grew warm. Sweat beaded on Tur's forehead, but he ignored the discomfort. The success of the hunt meant the difference between full bellies and hungry ones, between strength and weakness. A large kill like a Megaceros could provide food for days, its bones and hide yielding materials for tools, weapons, and clothing. Failure was not just an inconvenience, it was a direct threat to the band's survival. Finally, Gron raised a clenched fist. The group froze. Ahead, through a break in the trees, was a small clearing. And there they were. A herd of giant deer, magnificent creatures with antlers so vast they seemed like walking trees. The animals were grazing peacefully, their large, sensitive ears twitching, their heads occasionally rising to sniff the air. The wind was in the hunters' favor, carrying their scent away from the prey. This was the moment of critical decision. A direct charge would be useless. The deer were far faster and would scatter in an instant. Their strategy was one of patience and coordination. Gran signaled for two of the hunters to break off and circle around to the far side of the clearing. Their job was to create a disturbance, to panic the herd and drive them towards the main group, who would be lying in ambush. Tor found a position behind a fallen log, his spear held ready. He slowed his breathing, becoming a part of the landscape. Time seemed to stretch and distort. He could hear the steady rhythm of his own heart. Then, a sudden, sharp cry echoed from the other side of the clearing. The deer's heads shot up. A moment of frozen tension was followed by explosive movement. The herd bolted, not away from the sound, but on a diagonal path straight towards the ambush. The ground trembled under the weight of their flight. Tor rose from his hiding place, his muscles coiling. He picked his target, a younger animal lagging slightly behind the others. The world narrowed to that single creature. He took a deep breath, balanced his weight, and with a grunt of effort, launched his spear. It was not a throw made in wild hope, but the result of a lifetime of practice. The spear flew true, a straight, deadly line. It struck the deer deep in the flank. The animal stumbled, letting out a pained bellow, but kept running. The hunt was not over. The wounded deer, now separated from the herd, was the new focus. The chase began again, this time a test of endurance. The hunters pursued the bleeding animal, following the trail of crimson drops on the leaves. Their persistence was their greatest weapon. While the deer was initially faster, its strength waned with every step, while the hunters, conditioned to long-distance travel, maintained their steady, relentless pace. After what felt like an eternity, they found the Megaceros. It had collapsed in a small thicket, its sides heaving, its great eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. The kill, when it came, was swift and respectful. Gron approached, and, with a precise thrust of his spear, ended the animal's suffering. There was no celebration, only a quiet, profound sense of relief and accomplishment. The hunters stood for a moment, catching their breath, offering a silent acknowledgement to the spirit of the animal that would now sustain their own. The hard work, however, had just begun. They had to butcher the massive carcass and transport the meat, a heavy and dangerous task that had to be completed before scavengers, like hyenas or wolves, were drawn by the scent of blood. The sun was already beginning its descent, reminding them that the safety of the shelter and the protection of the fire were still hours away. The kill site was now a place of intense, focused labor. The initial relief gave way to the urgent, gruesome task of butchering the massive animal. Time was a predator itself. The scent of fresh blood would carry for miles, a dinner bell for every large carnivore in the vicinity. Gron issued quiet, efficient commands. One man was posted as a lookout, climbing a nearby tree to scan the horizon for any signs of approaching danger. The others drew their sharpest stone, tools, hand axes, and flint flick sand, set to work. There was no reverence for the animal's form now, only a practical necessity to reduce it to portable pieces. Using the heavy hand axes, they began the arduous process of dismembering the carcass. The thick hide was tough, but with practiced skill, they found seams and weaknesses, cutting through muscle and tendon to separate the limbs from the body. The sound was a wet, tearing noise, and the air grew thick with the metallic smell of blood. Tor worked on a hindquarter, using a sharp flake to carefully separate the meat from the bone in large, clean strips. Every piece of tissue was valuable. The nutrient-rich liver and heart were removed first and set aside to be eaten soon after, immediate reward for the hunter's efforts. Efficiency was born of knowledge passed down through generations. They knew which cuts were the most tender, how to crack the long bones to access the precious fatty marrow inside a crucial source of calories, and how to carefully remove the sinews, which would later be dried and used as strong cordage for binding spear points or sewing hides. The skull, with its magnificent antlers, was too heavy to carry whole, but the antlers themselves were prized. With a few precise blows, Gron detached them from the skull. They would become raw material for tools like pressure flakers for shaping flint, or barbed points for fishing spears. As they worked, they ate. They sliced off strips of the fresh, warm meat and consumed them raw. It was a vital intake of energy for the strenuous task ahead and the long journey back. There was no disgust, only necessity and a primal satisfaction. The work was physically exhausting, their arms and backs aching from the effort, their hands and arms stained red up to the elbows. The sun beat down, and flies began to gather, another reminder of the need for speed. Once the animal was reduced to manageable portions, they used the deer's own hide as a makeshift sack, piling the meat, organs, and bones onto it. They fashioned crude ropes from vines to tie the bundle together, creating a heavy load that would require 2 men to carry, using a long pole. The weight was immense, a testament to their success but also a significant burden. The journey home would be slow and perilous, their strength depleted and their senses dulled by fatigue. Yet they were now more vulnerable than ever, carrying a prize that would attract the most dangerous competition. The return to the shelter was a trek of grim determination. The hunting party, now burdened with their life-sustaining cargo, moved as quickly as the heavy load would allow. The lookout, now back on the ground, scouted ahead, his eyes constantly searching for any threat. Every strange sound, a rustle in a thicket, the call of a carrion bird put them on high alert. The euphoria of the successful hunt had faded, replaced by the sobering reality of survival. They were now a slow-moving beacon for predators. As they neared the limestone outcrop, a series of pre-arranged calls were exchanged with those back at the camp. This was a critical safety measure, ensuring they were not mistaken for a hostile group or an animal in the fading light. The response from the shelter was a wave of visible relief and subdued excitement. The gatherers had returned earlier with their contributions, baskets filled with roots, tubers, a few handfuls of berries, and some bird eggs nestled in moss. It was a decent haul, but it paled in comparison to the mountain of meat being dragged into camp. The butchering process continued, with the whole band involved. The larger pieces of meat were further processed. Some strips were laid on racks near the fire to begin the process of smoking and drying, preserving them for the lean days ahead. Other portions were prepared for the immediate feast. The atmosphere around the fire that evening was qualitatively different from the previous night. There was a palpable sense of security, of a temporary victory over the constant specter of hunger. The sharing of the food was a fundamental social ritual, reinforcing the bonds that held the group together. The distribution was not equal in a mathematical sense, but it was equitable, guided by deep-seated customs. The hunters, who had exerted the most energy and faced the greatest danger, received the largest and choicest cuts. The elders were given softer, more easily chewed pieces. The children and nursing mothers received nutrient-rich parts, like the liver and brain. This system was not about fairness in the modern sense, but about the optimal functioning of the group. Strengthening the strongest ensured continued protection, while caring for the young and the old ensured the continuity of knowledge and the future of the band. As they ate their filler, rare and cherished occurrence, the communication round the fire became more animated. The day's events were relived through a more elaborate combination of gestures, sounds, and expressive pantomime. Gron reenacted the throat of the spear, his movements exaggerated and powerful. The others nodded and grunted in appreciation. This was more than just entertainment. It was a way of encoding knowledge. The younger members of the band watched intently, absorbing the strategies, the dangers, and the skills being demonstrated. It was a living textbook, a way of ensuring that the hard-won lessons of one day were passed on to the next generation. The story of the hunt would be retold and embellished over the coming days, becoming part of the group's oral history, a tale of success that would bolster their courage for the next uncertain hunt. The day after a major hunt was not a day of idleness. It was a day of different, less perilous, but equally essential labors. The surplus of food provided a temporary cushion, a window of time to focus on the maintenance and improvement of their material world. For Tor, the morning was spent not in pursuit of game, but in the meticulous craft of tool-making. He found a comfortable spot in the sun just outside the shelter and laid out his toolkit. Several cores of fine-grained flint, a round heavy hammerstone for the initial rough shaping, and a smaller, softer billet of antler for the more delicate work of pressure flaking. The process was one of intense concentration. He examined a flint core, turning it over in his hands, reading its natural fissures and shape. His goal was to predict how it would fracture. With a precise strike of the hammerstone, he knocked off a large flake. This was the blank from which a tool would be born. Holding the flake steady against his leg, he used the tip of the antler billet to apply pressure to its edge, peeling off a series of small, thin flakes. Each movement was controlled and deliberate. He was not just randomly chipping away. He was sculpting, guiding the fracture lines to create a specific, functional former, sharp-edged scraper for preparing hides. The sound, a crisp tock, 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 was the sound of progress, of technology in its most fundamental form. A mistake, a misplaced strike, could ruin the piece, wasting hours of effort and valuable raw material. This was a skill learned through years of patient observation and practice, starting in childhood by mimicking the adults with less suitable stones. Meanwhile, other members of the band were equally busy. The women who had remained in camp were working on the Megasaurus hide. It had been staked out on the ground, flesh side up. Using stone scrapers with blunt edges, they painstakingly removed every last bit of fat and muscle tissue from the skin. This was hard, monotonous work, but crucial. Any leftover tissue would cause the hide to rot and become useless. Once clean, it would be treated with animal brains or fat and smoked to soften it, eventually becoming supple leather for clothing, blankets, or shelter coverings. Another group was processing plant materials. Reeds were being woven into mats for sleeping or sitting. Fibrous plants were being twisted into sturdy cord. These quiet communal days were when the infrastructure of their lives was built and repaired. It was also a time for social bonding. The pressure of the hunt was absent, allowing for more interaction. The gentle teasing of children, and the sharing of knowledge between generations. An elder might show a teenager the exact angle needed to flake a spear point, or a mother might teach her daughter which plants yielded the strongest fibers for cordage. In these moments, the culture of the band was preserved and transmitted, not through formal education, but through the integrated rhythm of daily life. Life for the average caveman was not just a physical struggle for food and shelter. It was also a constant negotiation with an unseen world of spirits, forces, and omens. The line between the natural and the supernatural was thin and permeable. Every unusual event, a sudden storm, an unexpected encounter with a bear, a mysterious illness could be interpreted as the action of a spirit or a sign from the world beyond. The shaman of the band, an older man named Ka, who possessed an intense, introspective nature, was the interpreter of this hidden realm. He was the healer, the storyteller, and the bridge between the people and the forces that governed their lives. His knowledge of medicinal plants was extensive, but his treatments always involved a spiritual component. If Tor developed an infection from a cut, Ka would not only apply a poultice of antibacterial herbs, but would also chant and perform a ritual to drive out the evil spirit causing the inflammation. The great cave that lay a half-day's journey from their shelter was the physical heart of this spirit world. It was not a place for daily habitation. It was too deep, dark, and damp, but it held profound significance. On special occasions, or in times of crisis, Ka would lead a small party into the cave's depths, using stone lamps filled with burning animal fat to illuminate the way. The flickering light would reveal the astounding artwork that adorned the walls. Paintings of bison, horses, and mammoths, rendered in vibrant red and black ochre, often superimposed on one another, creating a dynamic, chaotic tapestry of life. These were not mere decorations. For Torah and his people, these images were powerful magic. The act of painting an animal was believed to give the painter a measure of power over it. By ritually hunting the image on the wall, perhaps by throwing spears at it or touching it, they hoped to influence the outcome of the real hunt in the world outside. The cave was a sacred place, a portal where they could communicate with the spirits of the animals they depended on for survival, to apologize for the kill, and to ensure the species' continued abundance. This spiritual belief system was a coping mechanism for a life filled with uncertainty and danger. It provided explanations for the inexplicable and offered a sense of control over a world that was largely beyond their control. A failed hunt could be blamed on a ritual improperly performed, rather than on simple bad luck, giving them a formula to try to improve their chances next time. This rich inner life, this complex relationship with the unseen, was as real and vital to their existence as the stone tools they carried and the fire they guarded so jealously every night. The subtle shift was felt long before it was seen. The sun, which had beat down with such intensity during the long days of the hunt, now seemed weaker, its arc across the sky lower and shorter. The nights carried a sharper bite, and the morning dew sometimes left a thin, crystalline crust on the grasses that lingered until the sun climbed higher. For the band, these were not mere meteorological observations. They were urgent signals, a calendar written in the landscape. The abundant days of late summer were drawing to a close, and the lean, challenging season of autumn was upon them. The rhythm of their work changed accordingly. The focus shifted from immediate consumption to frantic preparation. The hunting strategy adapted. Instead of targeting large, solitary game, they now pursued smaller, more numerous animals whose fur would thicken for the winter foxes, hares, and beavers. A thick winter pelt was as valuable as the meat itself. Every day was dedicated to building up reserves. The gathering parties spent longer hours foraging for nuts, acorns, hazelnuts, and beech nuts which could be stored in pits lined with dried grass and stones, providing a crucial source of fat and protein during the barren months. Roots were dug up and dried. Fruits were preserved by smoking or drying in the sun. Tor felt the pressure in the increased pace of life. There was no time for the leisurely tool-making of a few weeks prior. Now, repairs were made hastily, and any spare moment was spent contributing to the collective effort. The shelter itself was fortified. Gron led the men in gathering branches and thick layers of dry bracken to build a windbreak against the overhang S opening, leaving only a small gap for smoke to escape. The sense of community, always strong, became even more pronounced. Survival was no longer an individual prospect. It was a collective enterprise where the laziness or incompetence of one could endanger all. It was during this time of transition that the band's knowledge of the land proved most critical. The elders recalled the locations of certain caves and rock shelters that offered better protection from the prevailing winter winds. A debate ensued around the evening fire. Should they remain in their current shelter, which was familiar and well situated for summer, or should they undertake a risky move to a more defensible winter camp? The decision was not taken lightly. Moving the entire band, the children, the elderly, the stored food, and the essential tools, was a monumental task. But staying in an exposed location could mean death by exposure or starvation if a severe storm isolated them. After long discussions, filled with gestures pointing towards distant hills and mimed actions of snow and wind, the consensus was to move. The world of the average caveman was not a static one. They were not permanent residents of a single cave, but nomadic tenants of a vast, seasonal territory. The migration to the winter camp was a slow, deliberate procession. They traveled light, carrying only what was essential: tools. The precious fire-making kittimbers, carefully nursed in a hollowed-out log packed with dry fungusand, their immediate food supplies. The journey took 2 days, a tense time spent navigating unfamiliar paths and sleeping in temporary, insecure camps. But when they arrived, the new shelter was worth the risk. It was a deeper cave, its entrance facing southeast to catch the morning sun, and protected by a high cliff face that blocked the north wind. The interior was dry and spacious enough for the entire band. Establishing the new home was a familiar ritual performed in an unfamiliar setting. The fire was built up at the mouth of the cave, its light probing the deep darkness behind them. As their eyes adjusted, they saw that they were not the first to use this place. On the walls, faint but unmistakable, were red handprints, the signatures of people who had come before them, perhaps generations ago. This discovery was met with a sense of awe, not fear. It was a confirmation that they were part of a continuum, that this place was known to their kind and had offered safety to their ancestors. It was a good omen. Life in the winter camp was more confined and introspective. The days were short, and the world outside was often hostile, swept by freezing winds or blanketed in snow. Venturing out was limited to brief, essential trips for firewood or to check strategically placed snares for small game. Much of their time was spent in the flickering half-light of the cave. This was the season of storytelling. With the practical labors of survival reduced, the cultural and social labors intensified. Ka, the shaman, came into his element. By the firelight, his face etched with dramatic shadows, he would recount the great stories of the people. He told of the great mammoth, whose spirit created the first rivers with its tusks. He told of the trickster fox, whose cleverness often got him into trouble. These stories were not just fables. They were the tribe's mythology, their moral code, and their understanding of the universe. The children listened with wide eyes, while the adults nodded, seeing in these ancient tales reflections of their own struggles and triumphs. Torah learned not just how to hunt, but why they hunted, and the proper respect that must be shown to the spirits of the animals they killed. This oral tradition was the glue that held their identity together across time and space. Despite their best preparations, winter always brought the trial of hunger. A prolonged blizzard could trap them in the cave for days on end. The stored nuts and dried meat were rationed carefully, each portion growing smaller as the season wore on. The sensation of an empty belly became a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpened with the cold. The band grew thinner, their faces more gaunt. Energy was conserved, and movement was kept to a minimum. The vibrant social life of the autumn fire gave way to a quiet endurance. It was during this time that the group's bonds were tested most severely. Tensions could flare over the smallest things: a perceived unfair share of food, a careless use of the firewood. The social rules that held them together had to withstand the grinding pressure of scarcity. The leadership of Gron and the wisdom of the elders were crucial in mediating disputes and maintaining unity. The needs of the children and the nursing mothers were prioritized absolutely, for they represented the future. The stronger adults, like Tor, bore the brunt of the hunger without complaint, understanding it was the price of the group's survival. Illness, always a threat, became even more dangerous in winter. A simple cough could turn into a fatal respiratory infection in the damp, cold air of the cave. Ka's knowledge of herbs was pushed to its limits. When a fever took hold of one of the children, the entire band shared in the anxiety. The mother would rock the child ceaselessly, while Ka prepared remedies and chanted his prayers. Death was a familiar presence in their world, but it was never easy. The loss of a member was a wound to the entire group, diminishing their strength and their spirit. They would mourn, and then they would have to continue, for to stop was to die. This harsh reality was an indelible part of their existence, teaching them a profound resilience that modern humans can scarcely comprehend. The first sign of the end of this trial was the sound of dripping water. The steady drip, drip, drip from the icicles hanging at the cave's entrance was a melody more beautiful than any bird song. The air lost its knife-edge sharpness, and the snow outside began to recede, revealing patches of dark, wet earth. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the band. They had survived another winter. The return to the outside world was a cautious celebration. They emerged from the cave, squinting in the bright, strengthening sunlight, their bodies weak but their spirits lifting. The world was being reborn. The first green shoots of snowdrops and crocuses pushed through the mud, a promise of coming abundance. The hunting parties, their senses heightened by hunger, ventured out again, their goal now to find any early rising animal to break the long fast of late winter. The return of the sun and the lengthening days brought a palpable shift in mood. The confinement and the hunger of winter were replaced by a renewed energy and optimism. Plans were made to return to their summer shelter by the limestone outcrop. The stored food pits were opened, and the last of the reserves were consumed with the knowledge that soon the forests and rivers would provide again. For Tor, standing at the mouth of the cave and feeling the sun's warmth on his face, life was a cycle of challenge and reward, of scarcity and abundance. He had endured the hunger, the cold, and the fear. He had contributed to the survival of his band. He had grieved losses and celebrated successes. His life was hard, unquestionably so, but it was also rich with purpose, deep social connection, and an intimate, unbreakable bond with the natural world. He was not a brute stumbling through a nasty and short existence. He was a fully human being, a master of adaptation, living a life whose rhythms were dictated by the earth itself. As he watched a flock of geese returning north, honking loudly in the clear air, he felt a sense of belonging to something vast and eternal. The long night was over. A new season was beginning. Life within the band was a complex tapestry woven from threads of kinship, reciprocity, and shared struggle. The average band, numbering perhaps 25 to 30 individuals, was not a random collection of people, but an extended family. Kinship was the bedrock of society, defining an individual's rights, responsibilities, and identity. For Tor, every person in the group was defined by their relationship to him. Mother, brother, sister's child, mother's brother. These ties were his world, his safety net, and his primary allegiance. The social structure was egalitarian in the sense that there were no formal kings or chiefs. Authority was fluid, earned through demonstrated skill, wisdom, and strength. Gron's leadership was accepted because his decisions on the hunt consistently brought success, and his judgment in disputes was seen as fair. But this leadership was not absolute. Important decisions, like the move to the winter camp, were reached through consensus. The elders, particularly the women who had lived long enough to remember decades of seasonal changes, held immense influence. Their voices carried weight in council, for their memories were the tribe's library of survival data. Conflict was inevitable in such a close-knit group. A disagreement over the division of food, a rivalry between young men for status, or a personal grievance could threaten the group's harmony. The resolution of these conflicts was essential for survival. Open violence within the band was rare and severely discouraged, as it weakened the group against external threats. Instead, social pressure was the primary tool for maintaining order. Disapproval, gossip, or temporary ostracism were powerful correctives. Major disputes might be mediated by the elders, who would hear both sides and propose a solution aimed at restoring balance, often involving a gift or a concession from one party to the other. The goal was never to punish, but to reconcile, to mend the tear in the social fabric. Relations with other human bands were a different matter altogether. The world was sparsely populated, but encounters did occur, especially in resource-rich areas. These meetings were fraught with tension. Were the strangers friendly? Did they come in peace to trade, or were they a war party seeking to steal resources or women? Trade did happen, often over great distances. A unique type of stone for tool-making, decorative seashells, or rare pigments like red ochre could pass from band to band across hundreds of miles. These exchanges were cautious, silent affairs, with goods laid out on the ground and each group approaching separately. But just as often, encounters could turn violent. Competition for prime hunting grounds or shelter could lead to skirmishes. For Tor, a member of another band was not quite human in the same way his kin were. They were potential threats. These conflicts were swift, brutal, and deadly. The goal was not conquest, but deterrence to drive the rivals away. The psychological toll of this constant, low-level threat of intergroup violence was another layer of stress in their lives, a reminder that humanity itself could be as dangerous as any predator. In a world where the group's size was its strength and its vulnerability, birth was a moment of both joy and anxiety. A new child meant another future hunter or gatherer, another pair of hands to contribute to the collective labor. But pregnancy and childbirth were perilous. There was no medical care beyond the midwifery skills of the older women and Carr's herbal remedies. Complications that are routine in a modern hospital were often fatal for both mother and child. When a child was born successfully, it was a cause for celebration for the entire band. The infant was welcomed into a world of constant physical contact. It was carried everywhere, swaddled against its mother's body in a soft sling of leather, allowing her to continue her work while keeping the child safe and warm. This constant closeness fostered a profound sense of security and attachment. From the earliest age, children were integrated into the daily life of the group. They learned not through formal schooling but through observation and imitation. A toddler would play with a dulled version of a stone tool, mimicking the flaking actions of the adults. A young girl would follow her mother on gathering trips, learning to identify plants by their shape and smell. Death was an equally communal experience, with an average life expectancy likely in the 30s. Death from injury, illness, childbirth, or simply the accumulated hardships of life was a frequent visitor. The death of a band member was a devastating blow. The group would mourn, their grief raw and palpable, but their practical needs soon intervened. A body could not be left within the camp, as it would attract scavengers and spread disease. The burial practices of these early peoples reveal a deep and complex relationship with death and the possibility of an afterlife. There is archaeological evidence of careful burials, where bodies were placed in shallow graves in a flexed position, as if sleeping. Often, they were sprinkled with red ochre, a pigment symbolizing life and blood, perhaps in a hope of rebirth. Grave goods were sometimes included: a favorite hand axe, a necklace of animal teeth, or a cut of meat for the journey to the next world. These practices suggest a belief that death was not an end, but a transition. For Tor, the death of his father a few years prior had been a profound loss. The man's tools were passed on to him, and his body was laid to rest in a sacred spot, a cave overlooking the summer valley. Tor believed his father's spirit watched over the hunt, and he would sometimes speak to him silently when facing a difficult challenge. This connection to the ancestors provided comfort and a sense of continuity in a transient and dangerous world. The average caveman experienced the world through senses that were honed to a razor's edge, far surpassing our own dulled perceptions. Their survival depended on an acute and constant awareness of their environment. Tur's world was not a silent one, but a rich symphony of meaningful sounds. His hearing could distinguish between the harmless scuttle of a lizard and the deliberate, heavy footfall of a bear. He could hear the subtle change in a bird's call that signaled the ground predator's approach. The wind was not just a feeling on the skin, it was a carrier of information. He could smell water from a distance, scent the musk of a deer herd on the breeze, and detect the faint foul odor of a predator's marking. His vision was trained to see not just objects, but patterns and discrepancies. He could spot the slight movement of a single ear twitching in the undergrowth 100 yards away. He could read the story of the landscape in the bent grass, the disturbed soil, the broken branch. A snapped twig at knee height might mean a deer passed through. One snapped higher up could mean something much larger. His sense of touch was equally refined. Running his fingers over a flint core, he could feel the tiny ridges and fissures that predicted how it would fracture. The texture of a plant stem told him if it was suitable for cordage. This hyper-awareness created a profound, intuitive connection to the natural world. Tor did not see himself as separate from nature. He was a part of it, one redditor among many, one species in a complex web of life. He knew the habits of the animals he hunted and the cycles of the plants he gathered with an intimacy that was born of dependency. He knew when the salmon would run in the river, when the berries would ripen on the south-facing slopes, and when the geese would begin their migration. This knowledge was not written down. It was etched into his very being through a lifetime of observation and experience. His calendar was the position of the sun and the phases of the moon. His clock was the length of his shadow. This deep, embodied knowledge allowed him to not just survive, but to thrive in an environment that would be lethally hostile to a modern human, stripped of technology. The life of the average caveman, as embodied by Tor, was one of immense challenge, but it was not without its profound rewards. It was a life lived with immediate purpose. Every action, from chipping a stone tool to following a game trail, had a direct and tangible impact on survival. This fostered a deep sense of competence and self-reliance, tempered by an equally deep understanding of interdependence. The individual was nothing without the group. Their existence was not a constant, grim struggle. There was time for joy, the laughter of children playing, the satisfaction of a shared meal after a successful hunt, the comfort of warmth on a cold night, the awe inspired by a star-filled sky, undimmed by light pollution. There was art, music, and ritual expressions of a spirit that sought meaning beyond mere subsistence. The handprints on the cave wall were a way of saying, "I was here. My people were here." Tur's world was one of immense beauty and profound danger, of crushing hardship and deep social connection. He and his kind were the ultimate survivors. Over thousands of years, with patience and resilience, They spread across the globe, adapting to every climate and challenge. They did not simply endure. They laid the foundations for everything that was to come. Their mastery of tool-making, their control of fire, their complex social structures, and their symbolic thinking were the first chapters of the human story. The average caveman was not a brute, but a pioneer. His legacy is not just in the stone tools we find buried in the earth, but in the very fact that we are here today, inheritors of the world they learned to navigate with such courage, skill, and grace. Their story is our story, a deep and enduring echo from the dawn of humanity. To understand the average caveman, one must venture beyond the physical realities of survival and into the silent, intricate landscape of his mind. Devoid of the constant linguistic noise that fills a modern human's head, Ter's thought processes were likely more direct, more deeply woven with sensory information and visual imagery. This does not imply a lack of intelligence, but a different structure of cognition. His mind was a vast library of spatial maps, animal behavior patterns, and plant lore, all recalled not with words, but with sensations and pictures. When planning a hunt, he did not articulate a complex strategy in sentences. He visualized the terrain, the predicted path of the herd, and the positions of his companions in a fluid, non-verbal sequence. Language existed, but it was probably a pragmatic tool, rich in concrete nouns and imperative verbs related to immediate needs. Fire, water, danger, come, go, hunt. Abstraction was expressed not through vocabulary, but through symbol and ritual. The red ochre handprints in the cave were not just marks. They were symbols of identity, of presence, perhaps of a soul. The act of painting an animal on a wall was a form of symbolic thinking, as sophisticated as any philosophical treatise. It was an attempt to influence reality through representation. This cognitive world was one where the boundaries between the real and the symbolic, the natural and the supernatural, were porous. A dream of a successful hunt was not just a dream, it was a communication from the spirit world, a sign to be acted upon. This mode of thought fostered a profound and poetic connection to the world. A specific rock formation was not just a landmark. It was the sleeping bison, a place imbued with story and meaning. A particular bird's flight pattern might be read as an omen. This animistic worldview, where spirits resided in animals, trees, and rivers, was a way of making sense of a complex and often unpredictable universe. It was a system of knowledge that allowed Tor to navigate not only the physical challenges of his life, but also the psychological ones, providing explanations and comfort in the face of mystery and death. Every moment of Ter's life was governed by a silent, unconscious calculation of risk versus energy expenditure. In a world where calories were hard-won and easily lost, no action was taken lightly. The decision to climb a tree for honey, for instance, was not made on a whim. It involved weighing the immense caloric reward of the honey against the high risk of being stung by bees, potentially fatal allergic reaction, or falling from a height. The energy spent in the climb itself was a significant factor. Was the band's food supply secure enough to justify such a risky, energy-intensive endeavor? This constant calculus shaped every aspect of their behavior. The choice of a migration route was a classic example. A direct path over a mountain pass might be shorter, but the energy cost of climbing in thin air and cold temperatures could be prohibitive, even fatal. A longer route through a valley, while taking more time, might offer opportunities for foraging and hunting along the way, making it the more energetically efficient choice. This ingrained conservation of effort is why we often see archaeological evidence of long-term habitation in areas with diverse resources, river confluences, coastal zones, minimizing the need for long, risky travels. This principle also applied to social interactions. A conflict within the band was not just an emotional disturbance, it was a threat to the group's energetic efficiency. Conflict wasted energy on anger and posturing, disrupted cooperative hunting and gathering, and could even lead to violence that incapacitated a vital member. The strong social norms promoting sharing and conflict resolution were, at their core, mechanisms for conserving the group's collective energy and ensuring its survival. The laziness often attributed to prehistoric peoples in popular imagination was, in fact, a highly adaptive strategy of energy conservation, a crucial skill in a world of scarcity. The world of the deep past was a world of sound in a way that is almost unimaginable today. Absent the low, constant hum of machinery, engines, and electronics, The auditory environment was defined by the sounds of nature, and within that, human sounds were stark and significant. The acoustic landscape changed with the time of day and the season. The dawn chorus of birds was a deafening celebration. The buzz of insects on a summer afternoon was a thick, vibrating blanket of noise. The howl of a wolf pack on a still winter night carried for miles a chilling and clear message of the wild. In this context, human communication by voice was used sparingly. A shout was an alarm, a signal of immediate danger, or a call to gather. During the hunt, silence was golden, and communication was guttural. But there were other sounds that defined their humanity. The rhythmic percussion of stone knapping, the talk, tick, tack of hammerstone on core was the sound of technology, a noise that would have been as familiar as the sound of a keyboard today. The sound of a drill, a pointed stone spun between the palms to bore a hole in a shell, or a piece of wood for a pendant, produced a low, grinding whir. And then there was music. While we have no recordings, we have flutes carved from bird bone, dating back tens of thousands of years. The sound of a bone flute, perhaps accompanied by a rhythm beaten on a stretched hide or a hollow log, would have been a powerful social and spiritual force. Music likely served to bind the group together emotionally, used in rituals, celebrations, and perhaps to soothe fears during the long, dark nights. The human voice, raised in song or chant, would have been a profound expression of community and a way of transmitting stories and myths across generations. This soundscape, mix of natural symphony and purposeful human sound, formed the auditory backdrop of terse life, a world where every noise carried meaning. The story of the average caveman does not end with the last ice age. It echoes in our very biology and psychology. Our bodies are still calibrated for a life of varied physical activity and intermittent fasting, not for sedentary lifestyles and constant caloric intake. Our stress response systems, designed to handle acute, short-term dangers like a predator encounter, are ill-suited to the chronic, low-grade anxieties of modern life. Our deep-seated need for social belonging, for face-to-face contact within a small, trusted group, is a direct inheritance from that long period when isolation meant death. The life of Tor and his people was one of incredible resilience, adaptability, and creativity. They faced challenges that would overwhelm most modern humans, and they not only survived, but laid the groundwork for all of human civilization. They were the first artists, the first engineers, the first astronomers, the first doctors. They crossed continents and adapted to extreme environments with nothing but their wits, their knowledge, and their profound cooperation. To think of them as primitive is to misunderstand them entirely. They were, in the context of their world, masters of their universe. They lived a life that was hard, yes, but also one of immense dignity, profound connection to the earth, and rich social meaning. The average caveman was not a stumbling prelude to humanity. He was humanity in its earliest, most essential form. His story is not one of absence of technology, absence of civilization, but one of presence, a powerful presence of mind, spirit, and community that allowed our species to inherit the earth. By understanding his life, we understand a fundamental part of ourselves, a deep and enduring echo from our collective dawn. In a world without written language, knowledge was not stored in books, but in the muscles, the nerves, and the very fingertips of the people. The true intellectual of the band was not necessarily the most vocal, but the one with the most skilled hands. This tactile intelligence was the cornerstone of survival. An elder like Una, the woman who often took the last watch of the night, could feel the coming of a storm in the ache of her old bones long before the clouds gathered. She could run her fingers over a leaf and know not only if it was edible, but at what time of day it should be harvested for the best flavor or highest medicinal potency. This knowledge was transferred through touch and demonstration, not explanation. A mother teaching her daughter to weave a basket did not give a lecture on tension and pattern. She placed the reeds in the child's hands, guided her fingers through the motions, and corrected the pressure with a gentle touch. Learning was a physical, immersive process. A young boy like Tor, learning to knap flint, would spend years simply watching the angle of his uncle's wrist, the precise pressure applied by the antler tine, before his own hands could reliably produce a sharp, usable edge. A mistake meant a cut, a wasted piece of precious stone, or a tool that failed at a critical moment. The consequences were immediate and tangible, creating a powerful feedback loop that honed skill with ruthless efficiency. This embodied knowledge created a deep, non-verbal intimacy with the material world. Thor knew the weight and balance of his favorite spear, not as a number, but as a feeling of rightness in his palm. He knew the exact moment when a hide was sufficiently softened by the combination of scraping, stretching, and smoking, not by a timer, but by the specific supple resistance it gave under his hands. This wisdom of the hands fostered a profound respect for materials. A piece of fine-grained flint was treated with care, as it represented hours of dangerous travel to its source and many more hours of skilled labor to shape it. Nothing was taken for granted, and everything was used to its fullest potential, because the effort required to create it was understood in the body, in the tired muscles and the calloused palms. For Thor, time was not a rigid grid of hours and minutes, but a fluid, cyclical phenomenon shaped by natural events and biological needs. His life was governed by two primary rhythms: the daily cycle of light and dark, and the annual cycle of the seasons. Within these large cycles, time was measured by events. The journey to the winter camp took the time of 2 sunsets. The gestation of a woman was measured as 1 full cycle of the seasons. A man's age was not counted in years, but described by his experiences. He was born during the Great Drought, or he has seen the salmon run 20 times. This event-based perception of time created a mindset that was both patient and intensely present-focused. There was no concept of wasting time. If a hunt required waiting silently in ambush for hours, that was not boredom. It was a necessary part of the process. Time was something that happened to them, not something they managed. They moved with the rhythm of the sun, waking with the light and settling with the dark. The night was not for productivity, but for rest, social bonding, and introspection. This fluidity also meant that the past, present, and future were deeply interconnected. The past was alive in the stories told by the fire, in the burial sites of ancestors, and in the knowledge passed down through generations. The future was not an abstract concept to be planned for in detail, but a direct consequence of present actions rooted in past wisdom. Storing food for winter was not a financial investment. It was an act of remembering the hunger of previous winters and taking action to prevent its recurrence. This temporal awareness created a deep sense of responsibility. The actions of the present were a legacy for the children and a duty to the ancestors. They were the temporary custodians of knowledge, territory, and the very future of the band. The olfactory world of the Paleolithic was a dense, complex, and critically important layer of reality. In an era before sanitation, deodorants, or artificial fragrances, smell was an unmediated stream of information about the environment, food, and each other. Thor's sense of smell was as vital as his sight or hearing. He could smell water hidden beneath the earth near a dry riverbed. He could distinguish the scent of an edible tuber from a poisonous one by the faintest difference in their earthy aroma. On the hunt, he could smell the musky odor of a deer herd long before he saw them. And, more importantly, he could smell the pungent, dangerous scent of a predator like a cave lion, giving him a crucial warning. This world of scent was also a world of intimacy and belonging. The band had a collective odor, a mixture of wood smoke, cured leather, dried sweat, and the particular scent of their diet. This was the smell of home, of safety. To Thor, the scent of his child or his mate was as familiar and comforting as their faces. Smell was also tied to memory and navigation. A particular combination of pine resin and damp stone might signal the approach to a favorite berry patch. The sulphurous smell of a hot spring could guide them to a warm bathing spot in the depths of winter. Conversely, bad smells were signals of dire warning. The stench of rot meant spoiled food or a carcass that might attract scavengers. The smell of infection in a wound was a harbinger of potential death. The air they breathed was a constant narrative, telling them where they were, what was around them, and what was about to happen. This rich, unfiltered sensory experience connected them to their environment in a way that is almost completely lost to modern humans, for whom smell is often merely an aesthetic consideration or a nuisance. For Thor, it was a fundamental tool for navigating life and death. To pass a final verdict on the life of the average caveman is to recognize that it defies simple categorization. It was a life of undeniable hardship, constant vulnerability, and often short duration. Pain, hunger, fear, and loss were frequent companions. Yet, it was also a life of profound purpose, deep community, and an intimate connection to the world that is unimaginable today. Ter's existence was not one of existential angst or meaningless toil. His purpose was clear and immediate: to contribute to the survival of his band. This purpose was reinforced with every successful hunt, every gathered basket of nuts, every child that grew to adulthood. His social world, while small, was incredibly deep. His relationships were for life, forged in shared struggle and mutual dependency. He knew no loneliness in the modern sense. He lived within a web of meaning provided by myth and ritual, which explained his place in the cosmos and offered comfort in the face of the unknown. Perhaps the most significant aspect of his life was the absence of a separation between humanity and nature. He was not an observer of the natural world. He was a participant, an animal among animals, subject to the same forces and dependent on the same resources. This fostered not a romantic idealization of nature, but a pragmatic, profound respect for it. He understood his dependence on the herds, the plants, the water, and the seasons. This connection was the source of both his greatest challenges and his most meaningful experiences. The average caveman was not a brute, but a complete human being. He possessed the same cognitive capacity, the same emotional range, the same capacity for love, grief, joy, and curiosity as we do today. He simply exercised these capacities in a different world. His legacy is not one of primitivism, but of resilience. He endured ice ages, migrated across continents, and invented the technologies that made our world possible. By remembering his story, we remember a fundamental part of our own humanity, a part that still yearns for purpose, for community, and for a tangible connection to the earth we all call home. In the absence of written statutes, courts, or police, the band governed itself through an unwritten code of conduct that was as binding as any modern law. This code was not enforced by a distant authority, but by the immediate and intimate pressure of the group itself. The fundamental principle was reciprocity. Sharing was not merely encouraged, it was obligatory. A hunter who failed to share his kill would not be arrested, but he would face a far more severe punishment: social ostracism. In a world where survival was a collective endeavor, to be shunned was a death sentence. This created a powerful incentive for cooperation and fairness. Justice was restorative, not punitive. The goal was not to punish a wrongdoer, but to restore harmony to the group. If a man, in a fit of anger, damaged another's prized spear, the resolution would not involve imprisonment. Instead, the elders would mediate, and the offender would be expected to craft a new, even better spear as replacement, or perhaps offer a portion of his food shares for a set time. This act of restitution was more valuable to the group's survival than simply inflicting pain on the culprit. The concept of individual rights as we know them was subsumed by the needs of the band. Your right to your possessions ended where the group's need for your survival began. This system extended to the most serious crimes. Murder within the band was exceedingly rare, as it would catastrophically weaken the group. If it occurred, the response was swift and severe, but still pragmatic. The band might banish the murderer, casting them out into the wilderness alone, which was effectively a death sentence. In some cases, a blood feud might be avoided by the offender's family offering a substantial compensation to the victim's family, perhaps a young member to replace the lost labor, or a cache of essential resources. The morality was stark and practical. An action was judged good if it strengthened the band, and evil if it weakened it. This simple, brutal calculus was the foundation of their ethical world. Tor and his people were the original explorers, charting a continent with nothing but memory and observation. Their cognitive maps were incredibly detailed and vast. Tor knew not just the location of the winter cave and the summer shelter, but also the hidden water source in the limestone fissure, the specific valley where the raspberries ripened first, the ford in the river that was safest during the spring melt, and the cliff face where eagles nested, a place to be avoided during nesting season. This mental atlas was passed down through stories and songs that described landmarks in sequence. Walk towards the mountain that looks like a sleeping woman until you see the lightning-struck oak, then turn towards the setting sun. These journeys were not random wanderings, but deliberate migrations along seasonal routes that had been established over generations. They followed the game herds on their annual cycles and moved to where plants would be fruiting. The knowledge of these routes was the band's most valuable geographic possession. A successful journey required understanding, not just direction, but timing. To arrive at the bog too early meant unripe cranberries. Too late, and they would be gone. taken by birds or spoiled by frost. This deep, experiential knowledge of the land fostered a powerful sense of belonging. The territory was not real estate to be owned. It was a homeland to be known and understood. Every hill, stream, and peculiar rock formation had a name and a story attached to it. They were not just exploiting the land. They were in a dialogue with it. This intimate connection meant that environmental changes, a river changing course, a forest fire, a prolonged drought, were not abstract events but personal catastrophes that required immediate adaptation and the painful revision of their intricate mental maps. Their resilience was rooted in this profound familiarity with the whims of their world. The high probability of early death meant that loss was a constant presence in terse life. Children succumbed to illnesses and accidents. Women died in childbirth. Hunters were killed by animals or by falls. The death of a band member was a devastating blow, not just emotionally, but practically. Each person represented a unique repository of knowledge and a set of essential skills. The loss of an elder was like burning a library. The loss of a strong hunter threatened the group's food security. The grief was therefore acute and communal. The band would mourn together, their cries a stark sound against the wilderness. But their practices show a deep care for the deceased, suggesting a belief in an afterlife or a desire to honor their memory. The burial of the body with grave goods, a tool, a piece of jewelry, indicates a sentiment that transcended mere practicality. It was an act of love and respect. Memory was the only way to keep the dead alive. Stories about them would be told and retold around the fire. Your grandfather was the one who killed the great bear that stalked this camp, Gron might say to a young boy. The deceased lived on in the lessons they had taught, the tools they had made, and the children they had raised. This oral history was a chain of memory linking generations. A particularly skilled or brave individual might even be mythologized over time, their deeds exaggerated into legendary feats that served as moral exemplars for the living. In this way, the ache of absence was soothed by the warmth of memory, and the dead continued to guide and protect the living through the stories that were told in their name. As the sun sets on our exploration of Ter's world, we are left not with a picture of simplicity, but of a different kind of complexity. His life was a masterpiece of adaptation, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and sociality. The average caveman was not a crude ancestor we have surpassed, but a full and complete version of ourselves, optimized for a different environment. His legacy is not confined to museums filled with stone tools. It is etched into our very being. Our capacity for language, art, and cooperation was forged in the crucible of his existence. Our deep-seated need for social connection, our visceral response to threat, and even our love for storytelling around a focal point, now a television instead of a fire, echoes of his life. To understand him is to understand a fundamental part of our own humanity. It is a humbling reminder that the comforts and securities of our modern world are a very recent invention. For the overwhelming majority of human history, life was a fragile, beautiful, and arduous journey, much like Ter's. His story is the first and longest chapter of our own. By listening to the echoes of his world, we gain a deeper appreciation for the journey that has brought us here, and perhaps a wiser perspective on the challenges we face today. The cave is empty now, but the spirit of its inhabitants, their courage, their community, and their unwavering will to live endures in us. For Tor and his people, the landscape was not a passive backdrop, but a living, breathing text to be read. Every element held meaning, and the ability to interpret these signs was a matter of life and death. A broken spiderweb across a path, glistening with morning dew, indicated that no large creature had passed that way since dawn. The specific pattern of lichen growth on the north side of a tree trunk could serve as a rough compass. The behavior of birds was a constant newsfeed. A sudden, silent flight of sparrows from a bush signaled a ground predator, while a circling flock of vultures high in the sky pointed towards a potential source of carrion, a welcome prize that could save days of hunting effort. This literacy extended to the subtlest of clues. The way winds sighed through a particular canyon could predict a change in weather. The specific taste of the water from a certain spring could indicate minerals that were beneficial or, conversely, warn of potential sickness. They understood the interconnectedness of things in a way that was profoundly ecological. The presence of a certain type of beetle might indicate the nearby existence of a particular grub that was a delicacy, or it might signal the decay of a tree that would soon fall and block a familiar path. This knowledge was not held by a single specialist. It was distributed throughout the band. The quiet woman who rarely spoke on hunts might be the acknowledged expert on fungal growth, knowing which mushrooms signaled healthy soil and which indicated the presence of dangerous rotting matter beneath the surface. This collective intelligence, this shared reading of the land, was their greatest tool. Illness and injury were constant threats, and the band's approach to health was a blend of practical wisdom, herbal knowledge, and spiritual belief. Their bodies were tough, resilient, and conditioned by a life of strenuous activity, but a simple infected cut or a broken bone could be a death sentence. Their medicine was preventative as much as curative. A diet of varied wild plants, lean meat, and little to no processed sugar kept many modern ailments like heart disease and diabetes at bay. Constant movement ensured strong bones and muscles. When sickness did strike, Ka, the shaman, was the first line of defense. His knowledge of herbs was extensive, passed down through an unbroken chain of apprenticeship. He knew which plant could reduce a fever, which poultice could draw infection from a wound, and which tea could soothe a cough. But his treatment always involved the spirit. He believed that illness was often caused by a malevolent spirit or a disruption in the person's harmony with the world. His chants and rituals were designed to restore this balance. The placebo effect of this holistic approach, combining a potent chemical remedy with a powerful psychological intervention, was likely strong. The band also understood the healing power of rest and community. An injured person was cared for by the whole group, fed, kept warm, and protected. The will to live was nurtured by the tangible support of one's kin. This social safety net was a vital component of their healthcare system. Death from illness was common, but so was recovery, achieved through a combination of robust physical constitutions, practical botanical knowledge, and the unwavering support of the community, a trinity of healing that served humanity for millennia before the advent of modern medicine. The technological progress of the Paleolithic was achingly slow by modern standards, but it was steady, driven by the relentless pressure of necessity. Innovation was not a matter of abstract research but of solving immediate, life-threatening problems. The controlled use of fire was arguably their greatest leap forward, but it was followed by countless smaller, vital innovations. The observation that a heavy, round stone could crack open a bone to access marrow led to the first crude hammerstones. The realization that a sharp flake was more effective than a fist for cutting meat led to the systematic production of stone tools. These innovations often spread through a process of unconscious mimicry and gradual improvement. One individual might accidentally discover a better way to pressure flake a spear point, creating a sharper, more durable weapon. Others would see its effectiveness and copy the technique, perhaps refining it further. There were no patents, only the shared goal of survival. This collaborative, incremental innovation is evident in the archaeological record, where tool technologies evolved slowly over thousands of years, becoming more refined and specialized. Some innovations were born from pure serendipity, a chance discovery that was recognized for its value. Perhaps someone noticed that clay from a riverbank, when hardened in a fire, became permanent. This discovery would not lead to pottery immediately, but the seed was planted. The invention of the spear thrower, or otlotl, which extended the leverage of the human arm and dramatically increased the velocity and range of a spear, was a stroke of genius that revolutionized hunting. Each of these innovations, large and small, was a victory against the constraints of nature, a small spark of genius that collectively allowed humanity to expand its reach across the globe. As we conclude this journey into the deep past, we are left in a unique position. We can look back at Tur's world, but he could never have imagined ours. The gulf of time and technology is immense, yet a conversation across the millennia is still possible, not through words, but through the shared experience of being human. The artifacts he left behind, the stone tools, the cave paintings, the burial sites are his side of the conversation. They speak of a life of challenge, but also of creativity, community, and an unbreakable will to endure. Our modern world, with its astounding comforts and its unprecedented challenges, is the culmination of the path his people began. The same brain that learned to track a mammoth now designs spacecraft. The same hands that painted bison on cave walls now perform microscopic surgery. The same social impulse that bound the band together now connects billions online. The fundamental human drives for security, for meaning, for connection remain unchanged. The story of the average caveman is not a quaint prelude to history. It is the foundational epic of our species. It reminds us of our humble origins, our incredible resilience, and our deep, innate dependence on one another and on the natural world. In listening to the final echoes of his world, we may find wisdom for our own. We have conquered many of the physical challenges that tormented him, but we still strive to answer the same essential questions. How do we live together? How do we find meaning? How do we care for our world and for each other? Ter's life, in all its hardship and beauty, offers a simple, powerful answer: through cooperation, through knowledge, and through an unwavering connection to the earth that sustains us all. While the dramatic hunt often captures the imagination, the daily sustenance of the band relied heavily on the constant, unglamorous labor of the women. Their work was the steady rhythm that underpinned the more intermittent triumphs of the hunt. From dawn until dusk, their activities were a masterclass in efficiency and multitasking. A woman would be processing a hide with one hand while watching her children with a sharp eye, all while mentally cataloging the nearby vegetation for useful plants. Her knowledge of the plant world was encyclopedic. She could distinguish between hundreds of species, knowing which root could be pounded into flour, which leaf could staunch bleeding, and which berry, if eaten at the wrong time of year, could cause hallucinations. This gathering was not random picking. It was a sophisticated harvest. Using digging sticks hardened in fire, they would carefully extract roots and tubers without damaging the plant for future growth. They understood sustainable practices instinctively. They took only what they needed from a patch, allowing it to regenerate. The food they provided, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, eggs, and small animals like lizards or insects often constituted the majority of the band's daily caloric intake. The hunt brought in feasts, but the gatherers provided the daily bread. Beyond food, they were the primary manufacturers of many essential items, weaving baskets so tight they could hold water, twisting plant fibers into cordage strong enough to snare a deer, and tanning hides into supple leather for clothing and shelter. Their work was the bedrock of material culture. A Paleolithic childhood was vastly different from today, but it was not without its own structure and profound education. From the moment they could walk, children were integrated into the economic life of the band. There was no concept of childhood as a separate, sheltered stage of life. A toddler would play with a discarded stone flake, mimicking the flaking actions of the adults. A young girl would follow her mother on gathering trips, her small hands learning the feel of edible leaves versus poisonous ones. This learning was not theoretical. It was hands-on, experiential, and essential. Play was the primary training ground for adult skills. Boys would practice hunting with small spears, targeting insects or frogs. Their games involved stealth, tracking, and throwing. Girls would play at gathering, making small baskets of grass and cooking with mud and stones. Through this play, they absorbed the skills they would need for survival. The stories told by the elders around the fire were not just entertainment. They were lessons in morality, geography, and animal behavior. A story about the trickster fox who got caught because he was greedy was a lesson about patience and moderation on the hunt. This constant immersion in the practical and social world created incredibly competent and resilient individuals by the time they reached adolescence. They knew how to feed themselves, find water, make simple tools, and understand their place within the complex social web of the band. Their education was a matter of life and death, and it was seamlessly woven into the fabric of daily existence. In our hyper-connected world, true solitude is a rare commodity. For Tor, it was an even rarer, and often terrifying, experience. The band was his universe. To be separated from it was to be cast adrift in a hostile wilderness. Yet, within the constant proximity of the group, there were moments of profound quiet, during a long, solitary watch on a hillside, or while tasked with checking a distant snare line. Tor would have experienced a silence so deep it was almost physical. This was not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, the presence of the natural world. In these moments, without the distraction of social interaction, his senses would have heightened further. He would notice the minute movements of animals, the subtle shifts in the wind, the intricate patterns of clouds. This solitude, while potentially frightening, was also a space for introspection. It was a time to process the events of the day, to remember the stories of the elders, to feel the weight of his responsibilities. This psychological space allowed for a deep connection with the self and with the environment. It was in these quiet moments that the first inklings of abstract thought might have emerged. wonder at the patterns of the stars, a question about the origin of the world. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the buzzing of life and the stirrings of a conscious mind grappling with its place in a vast, mysterious universe. Our journey with Tor and his band must eventually come to an end. We leave them as we found them, not as frozen specimens in a museum display, but as vibrant, complex people living their lives with a strength and dignity we can only admire. They stand at the beginning of our story, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their time on Earth was the crucible in which the human spirit was forged in resilience, in creativity, in cooperation. Their world was one of stark contrasts, breathtaking beauty and brutal hardship, intense community and the ever-present fear of solitude, moments of abundant joy and periods of gnawing hunger. They lived a life that was truly human in scale, where every individual was known and every action had a direct consequence. They did not simply endure their existence. They shaped it with their hands, their minds, and their hearts. They painted their dreams on cave walls, buried their dead with tenderness, and passed their hard-won knowledge to their children. The average caveman has long since vanished from the earth, but his legacy is all around us. It is in the language we speak, the societies we build, and the innate curiosity that drives us to explore. He was the first artist, the first scientist, the first storyteller. By understanding his life, we honor our own origins and gain a deeper appreciation for the incredible journey of our species. The dawn has long since passed, but the light of those first people still illuminates who we are today. Their story is our story, an eternal cycle of struggle and triumph that continues to unfold. The survival of the band depended on a fragile, unbroken chain of knowledge passed from old to young. In a world without writing, the elders were the living libraries, their minds the repositories of countless seasonal cycles, hunting strategies, and survival techniques. The death of an elder was not just a personal loss. It was a potential catastrophe for the group's cultural memory. An elder like Una carried maps of migration routes in her mind, remembered the taste of a berry that hadn't fruited in a decade, and knew the story behind every scar on the landscape. This knowledge was transferred not in formal lessons, but through a constant process of osmosis and storytelling. A child listening to an elder recount a long-ago hunt was not just being entertained. They were learning about animal behavior, terrain, navigation, and group coordination. The stories were mnemonics, designed to make critical information memorable and engaging. This oral tradition ensured that the collective wisdom of the band, earned through generations of trial and error, was preserved and passed on. A priceless inheritance that each generation was duty-bound to receive, add to, and transmit to the next. While the magnificent cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira rightfully astonish us, the artistic expression of Paleolithic people was far more diverse and integrated into daily life. Their artistry was not confined to dark, sacred chambers. It was woven into the very fabric of their existence. They were the first designers, adorning their bodies with ochre, charcoal, and chalk, creating patterns that may have signified status, group affiliation, or readiness for ritual. They carved intricate patterns and animal figures into their tools, and weapons. A spear thrower might be embellished with a charging ibex, transforming a functional object into a thing of beauty and perhaps a repository of hunting magic. They collected feathers, shells, and animal teeth, stringing them into necklaces and bracelets that rattled and shimmered with movement. This artistry served multiple purposes. It was a way to impose human order and beauty on a raw and untamed world. It was a means of communication and identity, and it was likely deeply connected to their spiritual beliefs, a way to capture the essence of an animal or to honor a spirit. Even the everyday act of knapping a stone tool had an aesthetic dimension. A skilled toolmaker produced flakes that were not just sharp, but symmetrical and elegant. For Tor, beauty was not a separate category of experience reserved for specialists. It was an inherent part of making, using, and inhabiting the world. His life was rich with pattern, symbol, and color, all derived from the palette of the earth itself. What was it like to think, to be conscious, in a world without written words? Torres' inner life was likely dominated by sensory impressions and vivid mental imagery rather than an internal monologue of structured sentences. His thoughts would have flowed in a stream of smells, sounds, pictures, and physical sensations. When remembering a successful hunt, he wouldn't think, "I remember the day we hunted the Megasaurus." He would re-experience the crisp morning air, the sight of the animal's breath fogging in the light, the tension in his muscles as he drew back his spear, the roar of the herd stampeding. This mode of consciousness was deeply immersive and present-focused. This does not mean he was incapable of abstraction or planning. His ability to plan a complex ambush or to conceive of a future winter camp proves otherwise. But his abstractions were likely rooted in physical metaphors and symbols. The concept of the future might be linked to the path of the sun or the image of a distant mountain range yet to be crossed. His sense of self was probably more collective and less individualistic than our own. His identity was inextricably tied to his band. His well-being was their well-being. To be conscious was to be aware of one's place within a social and natural network, to feel the weight of a shared breath in the dark shelter, and to understand one's life as a single thread in a vast enduring tapestry. As we take our final leave of Ter's world, we are left with a sense of profound connection. The 40,000 years that separate us are but a blink in geological time. The human emotions that animated him, love for his family, fear of the dark, pride in his skill, grief at a losser, the very same emotions that animate us today. We have built cities, developed technologies he could not dream of, and unlocked secrets of the universe he never knew existed. Yet, we still seek the same fundamental things: security, belonging, meaning, and a legacy that outlasts our brief lives. His legacy is not just in our genes, or in the stone tools in museum cases. It is in our capacity for awe before a starry night, in our urge to create something beautiful, in our need to sit together and share a story. The long horizon he looked towards is the same one we face, filled with both promise and peril. His story teaches us that our greatest strength has always been our ability to cooperate, to adapt, and to care for one another. The challenges we face today are different in scale, but they require the same resilience, the same ingenuity, and the same profound sense of community that allowed a small band of humans to survive and thrive in a world of ice and giants. The cave may be empty, but the fire they kindled there still burns within us. The soundscape of Torah's world was not limited to the practical noises of survival. Music and rhythm were woven into the fabric of their existence, serving as powerful tools for social cohesion, spiritual practice, and pure emotional expression. The first instruments were likely simple percussive ones: a rock struck against a hollow log, a bundle of dried seeds shaken in time to a heartbeat, or hands clapping in complex rhythms around the fire. These sounds were more than entertainment. They were a way to synchronize the group, to create a shared experience that reinforced social bonds. The rhythmic pounding of stones processing nuts or ochre would naturally evolve into patterns and songs, turning labor into a communal activity. Later came wind instruments, like bone flutes, carefully crafted from the wing bones of large birds. The sound of these flutes, haunting and melodic, would have been used in rituals, perhaps to mimic animal calls during hunting magic or to communicate with spirit worlds. Singing and chanting were undoubtedly central to their culture. A hunting party might sing a low, rhythmic chant to steady their nerves and coordinate their movements as they stalked prey. A mother would sing a lullaby to her child, a melody passed down through countless generations. These songs were their oral history, their prayers, and their emotional release. Through music, they could express joy, sorrow, hope, and fear in a way that transcended the limitations of their spoken language. Ter's understanding of space and his ability to navigate were critical to his survival. His brain was a sophisticated GPS, constantly updating his position relative to an intricate mental map of his territory. This spatial awareness was not based on abstract coordinates, but on a web of sensory landmarks. He knew a place by the way the light fell through a particular stand of trees at noon, by the sound of the wind whistling through a specific rock formation, by the smell of the pine needles underfoot. He could reckon with astonishing accuracy, maintaining a sense of direction even in featureless terrain or under a cloud-covered sky by noting subtle cues like the growth patterns of moss on trees or the prevailing wind direction. This deep spatial knowledge extended to the micro level as well. The process of knapping a stone tool was an exercise in three-dimensional geometry. To successfully fracture a flint core, Tor had to visualize the internal structure of the stone, predict the path of the shockwave from his hammer strike, and strike at precisely the correct angle. This required an intuitive understanding of physics that we would now call material science. His spatial intelligence was not a separate skill, but was fully integrated into every aspect of his life. From the grand scale of migrating across 100 miles of wilderness to the minute scale of shaping a cutting edge that was both sharp and durable. The band's diet was in constant flux, dictated entirely by the seasons. There was no such thing as a consistent menu. Spring was a time of tender greens and lean times. Summer brought a bounty of fruits, berries and fish. Autumn was the crucial period of fat building, with nuts and large game, and winter was a season of austerity, living on stored reserves. This cyclical feast and famine shaped their physiology and their culture. Their bodies were adapted to store fat efficiently when food was abundant and burn it slowly when it was scarce. To survive the winter, they became masters of food preservation. Meat was sliced into thin strips and dried in the sun or smoked over a fire, a process that concentrated its nutrients and prevented spoilage. Fish was similarly preserved. Nuts were stored in cool, dry pits lined with leaves to prevent mold. Some foods might have been fermented accidentally or intentionally, creating early forms of preserved nutrition. The taste of their food varied dramatically throughout the year. The joy of tasting the first ripe berry of summer or the rich, fatty taste of fresh liver after a successful hunt would have been intense sensory experiences, far removed from the monotony of a modern diet. Eating was not just about sustenance. It was a direct engagement with the cycle of life, a celebration of seasonal abundance, and a testament to their skill in harnessing nature's provisions. Without mirrors of glass and metal, Tear's understanding of his own face would have been partial and fleeting. He would have seen his reflection distorted in the still water of a pond, or perhaps glimpsed a shadowy outline in a polished piece of obsidian. His primary sense of self came from his body, the feel of his own muscles moving, the sound of his own voice and, more importantly, from the reflections he saw in the faces of his kin. He knew he was strong when others relied on his strength. He knew he was skilled when his tools were admired. He knew he was valued when he saw warmth in the eyes of his family. This other-defined identity reinforced the collective nature of their society. The concept of individual fame or personal achievement, as we know it, was non-existent. A hunter's success was the band's success. An artist's painting was for the benefit of the group's spiritual power. This does not mean there was no individual pride, but it was a pride rooted in one's contribution to the whole. The self was a relational concept, a node in a network of kinship and reciprocity. To be an individual was to be defined by one's relationships. Son of Una, brother of Lana, hunter for the band. This deep interconnectedness likely fostered a powerful sense of belonging, but left little room for the modern ideal of the autonomous, self-defined individual. In the tight-knit environment of the band, touch was a primary language. In a world where verbal language might have been limited in its vocabulary, physical contact conveyed a vast range of meanings that words could not. A hand placed on a shoulder could communicate reassurance, warning, or solidarity. A nudge from an elder could correct a child's grip on a tool without a word being spoken. The constant physical proximity is leaping huddled together for warmth, grooming each other for parasites, sharing body heat, was a continuous conversation of care and connection. This tactile communication built and maintained social bonds. The act of sharing food was often accompanied by touch, reinforcing the gesture of reciprocity. A grieving person would be held, their sorrow absorbed and shared through the physical comfort of the group. Touch was also crucial for teaching complex motor skills. The only way to learn the exact angle and pressure for flaking flint was to have an expert guide your hands through the motion. This language of touch created a profound physical empathy among band members. They could sense each other's moods, health, and needs through subtle cues in posture, muscle tension, and body heat. It was an intimate, unspoken dialogue that strengthened the social fabric at a level deeper than words could ever reach. While they were not engaged in a market economy, the people of Tursband understood the principles of value and exchange. Theirs was an economy based on need and reciprocity, a simple algebra where the value of an item was directly tied to its survival utility. A fine, large piece of high-quality flint from a distant source had high value because it could be turned into multiple reliable tools. A rare seashell, while not directly useful for survival, might have high social or symbolic value, used as a decorative item to signify status or for use in rituals. Barter occurred both within the band and, cautiously, with other bands. Within the group, exchange was governed by kinship and obligation. A hunter might give a large cut of meat to a toolmaker, with the unspoken understanding that the toolmaker would provide him with a new spear point when needed. This was a delayed reciprocity, an IOU etched into the social memory of the group. Trade with outsiders was more formal and tense. It often involved silent trade, where one group would leave goods at a designated spot and retreat, allowing the other group to inspect them and leave their own goods in exchange if they found the offer acceptable. This prevented direct, potentially violent confrontation. These early economic interactions, though simple, established the fundamental idea of comparative advantage, trading what you have in abundance for what you lack, a concept that would eventually fuel the rise of civilizations. In a life filled with physical danger, the body was a living record of a person's experiences. Scars were not blemishes to be hidden. They were marks of survival, a personal history written on the skin. A deep gash on the arm from a boar's tusk was a badge of courage and a lesson in the dangers of the hunt. A burned scar from a stray ember was a reminder of the power and peril of fire. These scars were stories that could be read by others in the band, instantly communicating a person's past trials and resilience. Beyond accidental scars, there may have been intentional scarification patterns cut into the skin that served as permanent markers of identity. These marks could signify a rite of passage into adulthood, membership in the band, or a significant personal achievement. Like the patterns painted on the body with ochre, these permanent scars would have been a way of encoding identity onto the flesh, a declaration of "this is who I am and what I have endured." For a people without written records, the body itself became a text, its scars a language of experience, strength, and belonging that everyone in the group could understand. The band's social structure was, by necessity, fundamentally egalitarian. While individuals like Gron might emerge as leaders due to their skills, no one was immune to the dangers of their environment. A sudden infection could kill the strongest hunter. A fall could cripple the wisest elder. This shared vulnerability created a powerful leveling effect. Every able-bodied person's contribution was essential, and every life was equally fragile. This democracy of danger fostered a deep-seated sense of fairness. Hoarding resources or claiming special privileges was not just frowned upon. It was suicidal for the group, and therefore culturally forbidden. Decision-making, especially concerning major moves or conflicts with other groups, was typically consensual. The elders would weigh in with their knowledge, the strongest hunters with their assessment of risk, the women with their understanding of the band's resource needs. A consensus would slowly emerge from the discussion. This process, while slow, ensured that decisions had the broad support of the group, which was crucial for their implementation in a dangerous world where non-cooperation could mean death. This egalitarianism did not mean there were no conflicts or status differences, but it did mean that the survival of the group ultimately depended on a basic fairness that recognized the value and vulnerability of every member. The hunt was not merely a food-gathering activity. It was a profound philosophical and spiritual engagement with the world. They did not see the animals they killed as mere resources, but as sentient beings with spirits of their own. The act of killing was therefore fraught with meaning and surrounded by ritual. There was often a sense of gratitude and respect for the animal that had given its life to sustain the band. This belief in reciprocity was central to their worldview. By performing the correct rituals, perhaps painting the animal's image in a cave, or burying its bones with care, they believed they were maintaining a balance. They were ensuring the animal's spirit would return to the herd and be reborn, thus guaranteeing future hunts would be successful. This philosophy extended to a deep understanding of their place in the food web. They knew they were both predators and potential prey. This awareness fostered a humility that is often lost in modern societies. They saw themselves as participants in a great cycle of life and death, not as masters of nature. The death of the animal was mirrored by their own mortality. Both were part of the same eternal process. This worldview encouraged sustainable practices, taking only what was needed, using every part of the animal long before the concept of conservation was formally defined. It was an ecological ethics born of direct dependence and spiritual belief. As our journey reaches its end, we look back at Ter's world, not as a primitive struggle, but as a different human masterpiece. It was a life lived on a human scale, where the stars were a blazing canopy, the night was truly dark, and the air was filled with the smells of the earth, not of industry. It was a life of immense challenge, but also of profound connection to the land, to the animals, and to each other. The bonds of kinship were the strongest force in the universe, and the shared warmth of a fire was the greatest comfort. We have traded that world for one of incredible safety, convenience, and knowledge. But in doing so, we have perhaps lost something vital: the immediate sense of purpose, the deep, tactile connection to the natural world, and the unwavering certainty of our place within a close-knit community. Ter's story is not a call to abandon modernity, but a reminder of the deep roots of our humanity. His world is gone, but the echoes of his fire, his songs, and his struggles still resonate in our bones. He reminds us that technology alone does not define a good life, that community, purpose, and a connection to something larger than ourselves are the timeless foundations of human fulfillment. The last light of his fire dies down, but its embers still glow within us, a permanent reminder of where we came from, and perhaps a guiding light for where we need to go.